Today's Gospel from John is one of several biblical accounts of the apostles on a boat during a violent storm. In contrast to the other accounts, the apostles in today's Gospel don't seem frightened by the turbulence of the waves as they sail toward Capernaum. Only after they see Jesus walking on the sea toward their boat do the apostles become afraid. That got me to thinking about how sometimes we are afraid to admit how much we need Jesus in our lives when our boats are being rocked. People in our society, especially men, are encouraged to be self-sufficient, to go it alone, to never show weakness. But what happens when a storm in our lives upends our sense of self and leaves us feeling powerless? I recently heard a story about Dan Hurley. Dan played high school basketball for a Hall of Fame coach, his father, Bob Hurley Sr. When Dan began playing college basketball at Seton Hall, he hoped to follow in the footsteps of his older brother Bobby, an All-American point guard who won 2 national championships at Duke. By his junior year at Seton Hall, however, Dan seemed lost on the basketball court. He had never played so badly before. Even worse, Dan was deeply depressed. He even thought he might harm himself. He started thinking that he just had to leave school and the team in mid-season. But how could he face his father if he did? Bob Hurley Sr., who had coached both his sons at St. Anthony's High School, had taught them that Hurleys don't quit. Dan reached out to his brother for advice. Bobby could see that Dan was in pain. He told Dan that there was more to life than basketball. Bobby told his brother that he loved him. And he told Dan that leaving school was the courageous thing to do. So Dan took a leave of absence from Seton Hall and returned home to his parents. He felt like a failure. But a door soon opened. Bob Sr. came down with pneumonia and needed someone to help coach the St. Anthony's team while he recovered. Dan stepped in and rediscovered his love of basketball by coaching the high school team for which he once played. With a new sense of purpose, Dan eventually returned to the Seton Hall team. After graduation, he embarked on a career in coaching. In 2018, Dan became the men's basketball coach at the University of Connecticut. He has led Connecticut to 2 national championships, and the team nearly won a third earlier this month, losing to Michigan in the championship game. Dan says that the most satisfying part of his job is the relationships he forms with his players. When those players face challenges in their lives, Dan is able to share his own experience of how to deal with adversity. Dan Hurley's story is an example of how the storms in our lives can provide an opportunity for spiritual growth, a chance to more fully appreciate the depth of God's love for us and the important relationships in our lives. I can relate to Dan Hurley's story. Shortly after I went away to college, I felt lost. So I took a leave of absence and returned home to my parents. I felt like a failure. But my family and closest friends would not allow me to give up on myself. I learned that their love for me, that God's love for me, did not depend on my achieving certain goals or meeting certain expectations. They loved me simply for who I am. I also learned that I should not be afraid to seek God's help or to lean on loved ones when I face setbacks and disappointments in life. None of us needs to go it alone. We are stronger when we reach out to God and the people around us for support. Perhaps that is what St. Paul meant in his second letter to the Corinthians, when he paradoxically observed, "When I am weak, then I am strong."